Okay, we're up to Nazir Nun Beis Amid Beis. We have a challenging daf ahead of us. Right? Let's go over a little bit what we saw about the end of yesterday's daf. We're discussing bones. That's Nazir Magaleach Olav. So we saw Machlokus Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. That Beis Shammai was of the opinion that even 2 or 3 bones you be Megaleach on. And Beis Hillel was of the opinion those bones, as if you had a roiva kav of those bones, any bones, or even 2 or 3, you be Megaleach Olav. Beis Hillel was of the opinion those bones had to be from roiv minyan. They had to be from the majority of 125, and they had to be or roiv binyan. They had to be either from the legs. We said 3/4 of the legs, either 2 thighs and one shin, or 2 shins and 1 thigh. That was the opinion of Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai also said something very interesting. Beis Shammai said that you even from the shidra, and the Gilgoilis. Now the shidra Gilgoilis is a special chumrah, fellas, because in most cases you would need on a bone, you need gidim and basar. The shidra and the Gilgoilis do not need basar or gidim. They don't need flesh or sinews to go ahead and be matama. We had a shaila yesterday. Do you need both the skull and the spine, or singularly? And we were not pushed to the shaila. What about a roiva kav of shidra v'gilgoilis? In other words, we know that a nazir is megaleach on chatzi kav, and a nazir is megaleach on chatzi kav, as opposed to tumas oil, which would be 1/4 of a kav. For a nazir to end this naziris and start anew, it would have to be chatzi kav. Now, what about? We know that roiv kav would go ahead. Roiv kav is roiv binyan and roiv minyan. What about the shidra? The shidra and the gilgoilis. Would a nazir, since there's a special chumrah by the shidra and the gilgoilis that you don't need basar on them, like most bones, right? Would they also have a waiver according to the din of chatzi kav? In other words, would you need chatzi kav of shidra and gilgoilis, or be maybe more chumrah? Maybe we'd say even 1/4 of a kav of shidra v'gegoylus will go ahead and be metama. That's the shaila that we're presented with. A shidra v'gegoylus, what's the din of roiv kav? So we're beginning boy Rami Bar Chama. We're about 8 lines up, 2, 4, 6, exactly 8 lines up on nun beis on beis. Boy Rami Bar Chama. Roiv atzomas min shidra v'gegoylus mai. If you have a 1/4 of a loig of bones of shidra v'gegoylus, what's the din? 1/4 of a kav. I said a loig, 1/4 of a kav. Kikatani chatzi kav at samais. When did we learn that you need a chatzi kav at samais for the nazir to be megaleach on? That's heichadika mishar evarov. That's when it's from other evarim, which you'd have to be accompanied with what? Basar and gidim. Avam and shidra v'gegoylus, the chamiri, but the skull and the spine, which have the chumrah that what? They don't require meat or sinews. Maybe I feel a roivat samais. Maybe the nazir would even go ahead and be what? Be mitama on 1/4 of a kav. Well, maybe it's no different than any other at samais. You need a chatzi kav by what? By a nazir. So it's a very interesting shaila. In other words, we see that the shidva gegoylus guys have a unique din. They don't require basar or gidim. Now, does that unique din extend to the din of the amount? Would we say it doesn't extend and it's chatzi kav like any other bone? Or do we say, since it has that extra chumrah of not requiring basa, maybe the nazir would even go ahead and be megaleach on a roiva kav? That's the shaila at hand. That's a nice shaila. Okay, says the Gemara, Amar Rava Tashma. What does our Mishnah say? Again, our Mishnah that's saying all the dinim that the nazir is megaleach on, hashidra v'hal gilgoyles. It says the shidra and the gilgoyles. The isal kedaitach roiva at samais the asim in shidra gilgoyles. Chamir listening al roiva at samais haba min hashidra min al gilgoyles. The Mishnah said, what do you go ahead and overturns the nazir's naziris? A full skull, a full spine. Now, whether you need both or singularly, that was a shaila that we left. But mashma, you would need a whole. Good. If you're telling me that it's possible for the nazir to go ahead and be magaleach on 1/4 of a kav, Why tell me the din of a whole? Tell me a bigger chiddush. Even a quarter of a kav, he would be Megalei Achan. But when you don't tell me the chiddush of a quarter of a kav, it must be that you don't. It must be chatzi kav, like every other case. Again, what's a shaila? Guys, let's do the hands. Do you view the shid of a gagoilis? Very good. You can look into gagoilis. Do you view it what? Like any other din in Nazir, chatzi kav? But because of its uniqueness that it has, you don't need basar, maybe a quarter of a kav. Says the Gemara, says Rabbi, I don't understand the shaila. L'chayri can be placed from the Mishnah. When the Mishnah said, what does he go ahead and overturn as Naziris? A full head. If the halacha was a quarter of a kav, tell me a bigger chiddush. A quarter of a kav, he'd go ahead and overturn his Naziris. Certainly a full head would overturn his Naziris. So when you told me a full head, it's mashman that what? Okay. Now, the implication over here is that you don't have in a skull a roiva kav. You want to say that it's mashma over here that for sure, in every skull, you will have a roiva kav. In other words, it's taking for granted the following. Why do you tell me a full skull when you could have told me what? A quarter of a kav, meaning every skull had a quarter of a kav. It's synonymous. Whole versus quarter of a kav. So tell me the kiddush of a quarter of a kav, meaning in a skull you have a quarter of a kav. Good. Says the Gemara Amit Aleph. How could you say that? How could Rabbi give this teretz? V'haravu hu da'amar le'nitzrucha ella l'shiddur v'gegoylis she'ein behen roivat samois. Where you have a shiddur v'gegoylis that does not have a quarter of a kav. So if Rav is poishit, he wants to say every skull has a quarter of a kav. Hi Sim, I called you earlier. I'm saying shir. So you simcha l'kimcha fayim menashe, yivrecha adnai v'yishmerecha, yer adnai p'lavelecha v'knecha, yisnei p'lecha v'yaskenecha shalom. If you have time afterwards, I don't have time to help the Shabbos, you can call me, okay? Sorry, I try to do it beforehand, but guys, look. So look at me, guys. Look. Because this is a very difficult Gemara because the Girsa doesn't make any sense. Watch. What's Rabbi's teretz predicated upon? You told me a whole skull. Let's just pick a skull. Good. In every skull, there's a quarter of a kav. So if you could go ahead and overturn the Naziris on a quarter of a kav, why limit it to a full skull? Tell me a bigger chiddush. So what's the answer? That not every skull has a quarter of a kav. So you couldn't tell me that chiddush. Now, continues the Gemara, as they say, Basa the Shamim Rabbi Akiva. The whole it doesn't flow like anything. It doesn't flow. I'd like to go ahead and go with Tosfos' pshat, guys. Tosfos interjects a line. Let's look at the Tosfos. Basa the Shamim Rabbi Akiva. Says Tosfos, Kach kosav b'chol asfarim. That's the girsa we have in all the text of Agamaris. V'lo yisparish maharal v'gimgum. V'iloi mistafina miravus. In other words, there's no Rabbi Akiva. We don't know. V'iloi mistafina miravus. It says Tosfos, if I wasn't scared, Havamina, I would have said the following: Sheyesh chesarim b'sfarim. Our text is missing words. V'garsinon mikame pircha, and you goyris the words, guys. That third line, Basa de Shamim Rabbi Akiva, we're goyris before Amarava. In other words, on the top of your Gemara, that little space between Rashi and Vaharava, you would interject the line. And what would that line be? Right, the Kamarava like Nitzcha. Oma Mar Ukva, not Rabbi Akiva. You'd put in the words Oma Mar Ukva. Hacha b'shidra v'gagoylish ein behem roiva askinan. Here we're dealing with a skull that does not have a roiva kav. Pirish Mar Ukva bo litchais hatshuva she'evi Rava. He wants to push off Rava. Good. Okay. Says the Gemara. So what? Let's read the Gemara the way Tosfos learned, guys. Watch. Let's read the Gemara the way Tosfos learned. First, what is he saying? That outside, Fred the Gemara Kasha, skull, is it the same chatzi kav or is it a quarter of a kav? Says the Gemara, if it was a quarter of a kav, you should have told me. Every skull has a quarter of a kav. Tell me the bigger chiddush of a quarter of a kav rather than the skull. Good. Amma marukva, says marukva. So now, put in those words. Amma marukva. We're dealing with roiva kav that does not have, we're dealing with a skull that does not have roiva kav. In other words, now you can't be placed the shaila because the skull does not take. Now, what does Rava hold? Continues now, picking up the Gemara for Rava who the Amar like Nitzcha el Shidul Goyla Shem Ben Roivat Samais, meaning it could be also that he agrees with that. So how could Rava give this teretz also? Right? So what's the answer? After you heard from Mar Ukva that it's possible for what? A skull to have less than a quarter of a kav, that's when he said it. It's still a little fuzzy, but that's, in other words, basically you got the slug up that you can't be placed with the shaila because it's possible what? The reason we didn't learn a quarter of a kav is because it's possible for a skull not to have a quarter of a kav. Yes, Heshi.
So
yes,
you omit Rabbi Akiva? He's taken
Absolutely.
out?
Yeah,
okay.
you put,
right.
you don't say Rabbi Akiva, Mar Ukva, and you put those words. You see the Gra takes it out, guys. You see the Gra had a different pshat in the Gemara, the Aleph. In other words, the Gemara doesn't flow any which way. I chose to go with Taisus's way. There are other drachim. I'm going with Taisus's way, putting Mar Ukva in there. That basically slugs it up because you don't have a quarter of a kav. And Rav himself said that after you heard from Mar Ukva. That's the way it flowed. Toshma, let's be pushed to the Shaila. Shamay Omer, Etzem Echad min Ashidra min Gagoilis. You have what? One bone from the Shidra and one bone from the Gagoilis, guys, right? So, guys, watch. This is a huge chiddush. Listen to this. Guys, look at me. You say you don't even need a full skull. Even one bone will do the job, correct? What's a Shaila? Do you need a half a kav or a quarter of a kav? Beis Shammai says even one bone would do the job. Now, you're not being a raya for Beis Shammai because Beis Shammai is very machmir. We want to bring a raya from the Chachamim who argue on Beis Shammai, guys, right? How would they argue? If Beis Shammai says one bone, are you going to jump to a half or stop by a quarter? Guys, Beis Shammai says one bone. The Chachamim disagree. Would they disagree to the extent of a quarter or even go all the way to the kav? The mashmois would be the least amount, which would be a quarter. So they would argue on a quarter. So let's be Paishat Ashayla that for the bones of a skull or a spine, you do not need chatzi kav like all other Tamim Megala Misais and Naziris. A quarter would do the job. We're making an inference again against a very difficult Gemara. The inference is from what Shammai says. Shammai says one bone. Now Chacham disagree. To what extent? Usually you don't agree to the total extent. You don't agree to half. So they'll agree to a quarter. That's what the Gemara wants to say now. It says, Gemara Shani Shammai de Machmet Tvei. Now the Gemara seems to say the same thing. Liv should minei time with the Shammai de Machma hol Rabbanan adika chatzi kavat samais. And now the Gemara goes the opposite way, right? Maybe you're going to go to a half. Says the Gemara, Dilmad kan like pligi Rabbanan le the Shammai el be'etzem echad al v'roivat samis afil Rabbanan moida. Again, a very, very hard flow of the Gemara. The bottom line is you can't be placed the Shaila. Again, let's go to Shaila. Let me try to be placed it. What's a Shaila? Just like Shidra, skull, shit and spine. The Gilgoilis is different. It doesn't need basa. Maybe it's different than a quarter and a calf. We want to go ahead and try to be placed from Rava. Rava wanted to say every skull has a quarter, and you could have learned it, and you didn't learn it. We slugged it up. A skull can have less than a quarter. Now you want to be placed from Shammai, one bone, and the Chachamim would only go to a quarter. Maybe they go to a half, maybe a half, a quarter. Bottom line is you want to place the Shaila. Okay. That's the most difficult part of today's daf. Amar Reb Eliezer. Okay. To understand this, guys, I had a piece of paper in my Gemara, which I'm sharing with you. We could see this, right? We could see this? Yes? I'm always asking.
Yes.
Okay, watch. We have a Mishnah in Oiles. We have a Mishnah in Nazir. This is a quarter of a kav will make you tamei. A quarter of a kav of mace, roiv binyan, roiv minyan, will make you tamei. A quarter of a loig of dam will make you tamei in an oil. This is the Mishnah in Oiles. So it's a quarter and a quarter. By Nazir, you need a half a kav to be matama or a half a loig to be matama to be sized in Naziris. Good? A quarter by oilis, the Mishnah oilis. Nazir, we have a kula, a half and a half. Not a quarter, a half and a half. That's a kula. We're going to have three opinions in the Gemara. And our opinion is according to the last one, because the last one is the only one that's going to match up a quarter, quarter, and half. Good? The first opinion, a half to all, meaning across the board is a half. That would be chaylik on the Mishnah of Eilis that said a quarter, right? If it's a half to everyone, so it would be chaylik on this din of a quarter and a quarter. Second opinion, a quarter to all. That would be chaylik on the Mishnah of Nazir that says a half and a half. So these first two opinions do not shtim with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah, guys, is a half and a half, a quarter and a quarter. Who do we hold like? The Bezdin Achreim, the last Bezdin. Now, they say a half to all, even Nazir. A half to all, even Nazir. Yes? And a quarter would be by Truma, but not by Nazir and Oisei Pesach. So this is our Mishnah. This is our Mishnah. By Nazir, you're right, a half shtims. And the quarter by Oilois would be Le'inyan Trumas and Kachim, you be Tameh. But L'chayra, if you're Tameh from a quarter and a quarter, you would only, it would not overturn the Nazir's Naziris, nor would it impact your ability to bring the Pesach. Again, this would be our Mishnah. This would be our Mishnah. Here it is. Let's go through it again. A half to all, that takes care of Nazir, correct? That's great. A quarter by Trumas and Kachim, not by Nazir and Isa Pesach. So Oilis, this quarter and quarter are speaking that if you're in a room with a quarter of a loig of dam, and you want to bring, and does it overturn your Naziris? No. Can you bring a carbon Pesach? Yes. Yes? Got it? So this is our Mishnah. Okay, now we're going to ask on this Bez Hashem, but that's what we're talking about. I hope that chart was helpful. It helped me when I went through the Gemara. It says it inside. Let's see it inside now. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Zekeno Rishainim, Miktsasan Hoyu Oimim Chatzi Kavat Samais, Chatzi Loik Dam Lechol. That was the first opinion. Roivat Samis Revias Dam, Loy Lechol. Mixes Hoyu Oimim. That's the second opinion, a quarter and a quarter. Bezna Shalacheirim, the last opinion, Omru, Chatzi Kavat Samais, the Chatzi like Dam Lekol, that would take care of our Nazir part. Roivat Samis Revias Dam, the Truma V'Kachim, meaning if you wouldn't be able to eat Truma, you wouldn't be able to eat Kachim. Avaloy Nazir voice Pesach. It would not go ahead what and impact Nazir Pesach. So that is what is that would take care of this. Okay. Now, usually we have a rule when you have machloikis with two, it comes along the third one, and it's machriya beinehem. It makes a compromise between two of them. In this case, there is no compromise because they didn't make chilik between Trumas Kachim and Nazir Vayis Pesach, guys, right? Guys, look at the chart. When they said a quarter Yitame, that meant Yitame and Gansen. Whether it's Truma, whether it's Kachim, whether it's Nazir or it's Pesach. When he said a half Yitame, right, it meant in everything. So this last psak over here is not machriya between either one. It's not saying a half, well, again, half would agree with this one, a quarter would agree with this one, so therefore it's machriya, it weighs off both, because these two did not make a chilik between Kachim and Nazir or Pesach. According to them, if you're Tameh, the whole kit and caboodle, this and this. So therefore, this can't be a case of usually the third opinion comes along and it's machriya beinehem. In this case, it's not, because he's saying something totally different. He's saying the chiddush of there's a chilik between Trumas Kachim and Nazir Vayis Pesach. So it says the Gemara. Michti, Einach Rosh Shlishi Machras. Why do we paskin like the third Mishnah, the Bezdin Shalacheirim? They're not machriya. They're saying something totally new by making the distinction between Nazir Pesach and Truma Kachim. So Rabbi Yaakov Aridi, Mipi Shmuel Amru, we have Mesaira, Mipi Chagai Zechariah Malache. We have Mesaira that this is the halacha, the quarter and the half, that there's a distinction between the quarter, between the Nazir Vayis Pesach and the what and the Trumas V'Kachim. Okay, let's stop for a second. And I was bothered by this question. And here's the question. Listen to this question, guys. According to this chart, if you're in a room with a quarter of a leg of dam which is Tamei Tuma Doraisa, you could bring the Korban Pesach, and you don't have to wait to Pesach Sheni. You guys, you hear? In other words, the chart said a quarter of a dam or a quarter of a kav will only go ahead affect my ability to eat truma or kachim. It won't impact my ability to bring the Korban Pesach. Good. Now you know there's no inyan of bringing the Korban Pesach unless you could eat it. The Korban Pesach is to be eaten. There are kabbanas you can bring even if you don't eat. But the whole reason for the Korban Pesach is to eat it. If I'm Tomei Tumas Meis, I can't eat kachim. I can't. In other words, it's a stira minei ubei, guys. On one hand, you're telling me you can bring the Pesach. On the other hand, you're telling me you can't eat it because you can't eat kachim, and the Korban Pesach is kachim. You hear the problem? I'm not convinced that by yell you're going to understand it better. This last shita, look, a quarter means you have a quarter of a leg of dam. For example, you're under a roof with a quarter of a leg of dam. Now you're tummy. Says, and this is the psak, you can't eat truma and you can't eat kachim, but you're not tummy in your nazir nor oisa pesach. That's what you're telling me. But you're tummy. So what would you tell me? You bring the pesach. If you bring the Pesach, you got to eat it, right? But I can't eat it because it's kachim. How are we doing? Guys, it's a powerful question, right? It's a powerful, powerful question. Okay, so this, I used the Sefer Shirei Yom. He quotes a Sidrei Tyrus, and he quotes a Sefer called Mekeres HaMishnah, which is on the Rambam, and he wants to say the following, guys. He wants to say the following. I don't want this. You can see this? Can we see this, guys? Yes, we see this? Just give me a finger.
Yes, we see it. No problem.
Right. This Rambam is in Perek Vav from Hilchos Korban Pesach, Halacha Beis. This Rambam is found in Perek Hey, Halacha Beis. Listen to this. Tamei Meis shechal shvi shaloi liyos bar ba'asar. Again, 7 days you have to wait to be matar. You had day 3 spritz and day 7 spritz. Afa pisha tavel. He went to the mikvah on Yudalid for huza love, and he was sprinkled upon Yudalid. Fari huroi lechol kachim le'erev, and therefore it's possible for him to eat kachim in the evening. Nonetheless, ein shoichten alav. You don't shech the Korban Pesach for that individual. Ela nitcha lePesach Sheni. He goes to Pesach Sheni. So even though it's possible to be purified by the evening, since right now he's tamei tumas meis because he's not free till the evening, is the full yom, you don't do it. You don't sprinkle. Got it? Pesach Sheni. You don't bring the Korban Pesach for him. I meant. Shenemar vahi anoshim ashahoyu tameim lenefesh adam lo yochlu lasos at Pesach bayom ahu. They weren't able to bring Pesach that day. Mipi Shmua, we have a Messiah, says the Rambam, that these are people we said who are either they were watching the Atzmas Yosef, they were carrying Atzmas Yosef, or they were the ones who were Matama to Nadav Avihu. Lamdu Sheshvi Shalahen, their 7th day, Hoya, it was the 7th day. Va'azeh Shalu, Im Yishchatoin Aleim. And that was the question, can you shek for them on that day? Vehem Yochlu Erev, and then they'll eat in the evening. Upirish Lahem, and it was explained to them, Shein Shechtem Aleihem. In other words, those people who said they were Tamei Tumas Meis, it wasn't shot they were Tamei Tumas Meis and they didn't go through the process. They were Tamei Tumas Meis and they went through the process. And they were asking a Lamda Shashayla. I went to the mikvah. I had this Parah Aduma sprinkled upon me. Can I, if the Pesach be bought for me now, that I can eat it in the evening when I'm Tahar? And the answer was, wait till Pesach Sheni. That was the Shmua. However, the Medavam Amurim, what Tumah are we speaking about? B'shenitma b'tuma min ames shehanaza megaleach aleim. Dafka, if you tame from a tumas mace, that the naza will be megaleach. That goes to Pesach Sheni. Aval im hoya tame b'shar tumais min ames she'ena naza megaleim. If you tame all tuma that the naza won't be megaleach, shoich din alav b'shvi shaloi. You could shech achesh etivloi after you were toivel v'yaza alav and you were sprinkled with the paraduma. Yarev Shimshoi, and when the sun sets, Oichel Pischoi. Says the Rambam, there's a chilik between the mace that the Nazar will end as Naziris and the Nazar that won't end in Naziris. The Ravid over here says, I don't understand the source for the Rambam. Says the Merkevis HaMishnah, I'll tell you the source for the Rambam. You know what the source is, guys? The source is what we just saw, which I don't have anymore. The source is this sheet. Guys, in order for a nazar to be sliced in the Naziris, how much bones do you need? Chatzi kav, you need a half. How much dam do you need? A half a loig. What do we paskin? In this case, it's a quarter of a loig, right? By what? But a nazir, it's not going to be tamei linyan nazir. It's not going to be tamei the Pesach. You know what that means? It means since the nazir will not it won't override his naziris because it's only a quarter, not a half. Therefore, oisa Pesach, meaning when his shvi falls out, he's able to bring the Pesach because in the evening he'll be tahar. That's the source of the Rambam, our Gemara. That's the source of the Rambam to make this chilik. A beautiful, beautiful teretz, guys. Again, we have a problem. Oisa Pesach, you tame tuma daraisa, and you're going to go ahead and bring a carbon Pesach? Says the Gemara, of course, if it's day 2 or day 3, you can't bring a carbon Pesach. We're not speaking a person who's in the middle tamei mace. We're speaking about a person who has the capacity, when it comes time of the achila, to be purified, to be clean. That's the one we're speaking about. Oh, what's the chiddush? If it's Nazir, says the Rambam, if it's tamei tumas mace, that a nazar will override his naziris, he can't bring it. Mipi Shmuel, you know why? Those were the fellas who asked the kasha by what? By Moshe Rabbeinu. And they were told to go to Pesach Sheni. They were mamish tamei tumas mace. They touched the bones. They were in the oil of the shidra. They mamish with tamei tumas mace. They cleansed themselves 3 days and 7 days, and now they want to know: can I bring the Pesach in this evening? And the answer was, no. You got to wait to Pesach Sheni. Says the Rambam. However, that's only them that a nazar will be megaleach upon. But one who a nazar would be megaleach upon, for example, a quarter of a kav, a quarter of a loig, rather than a half a kav and a half a loig, then you could. Why? Because that's the halacha. The halacha is that we see from our Gemara, there's a distinction between the quarter vis-a-vis Trumei Kachim and the quarter vis-a-vis Nazir. It's not the Nazir to the extent to override his Naziris. So it'll be a very beautiful pshat how to explain a difficult Gemara. Okay, a little extra credit for, I don't know what you said. I liked it. Okay, says the Gemara weiter. Al elu anasim megalech. Okay, let's go, guys. Let's go back to the lashon of the Mishnah. Let's go through the Mishnah. We're going to be medayik a certain halachas. Let's see the Mishnah on Memtes. The Mishnah on Memtes. Al elu tumis anasim megalech alav. On these the nasil megalech. Okay, mace kazayis mina mace kazayis netzel moli tavid rokov. I'm not even going to go over these. You know them already, right? Al shidav al gogoylis v'alevim min achai mace. We didn't get to yet. V'alevim min achai. Sheyesh lev kazayis basa. V'chatzi kavat somes chatzi loig dam. V'al magon v'al mason v'al elun v'letzim kasoyr al magon v'masa al elu hanazir han megaleach. Okay, so you have 2 elus, the first one and the second one, right? First one and the second one. So we want to know, what do you do with these 2? Back by us. Keep your hand by here. We're going to go back to this mission in a second. Says the Gemara, al elu deresh the first one, lemute etzim kasoyra. It's to exclude the etzim kasoyra because an etzim the etzim, the bone of a mace, the size of a barley bean. That's only metama tumas mago masa, touch no carrying. It's not metama tumas oil. So the almagav al masah in al hiluloi. Those ones we just described, al ames, the al tamin in ames, and netzel, all those they're metamatumis oil. So elu metamatumis oil. Masha'en kein etzem kasayra. Now, what about the second one? The elu al elu. Now the last elu is going on etzem kasayra. That if a nazir would touch a bone, it would override the naziris. It would be sliced in the naziris. Val elu the seifel le'maute even hasachuchas. Now that's the next Mishnah on Daf Nun Dalid. And even hasachuchas is the following: you have a bones, you have a wall, protruding from the wall are stones, and there's a mace underneath one of them. The nazir walks under them. He's not sure which one he walked under. You're not sure whether he's tummy or not. Then it's not going to be sliced as naziris. So elu, when you have a vadai maga of etzem kasayra, that will be sliced in naziris, even though it's not an oil. However, elu dafka, as opposed to the suffix of Evan Skuchis, whether he was tummy at all. So that's what it excludes the last one. Now, the next that was the next din of the Mishnah, right? The next din of the Mishnah was chatzi kavat samais, right? Amid beis, chatzi kavat samais in roivat samas loy. Good. Hechi dami. Ilema de ispahain at samais kisaira. Typically mishum etzem kisaira. Ella de amkich amkuche. This is a very, very hard Gemara. It doesn't. You really, without Tosfos, I would be totally lost. What does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says chatzi kav, and that's oil, as opposed to roiva hakav. A roiva kav with roiva at samais l'chayra is not metamet to oil. Only chatzi, not roiva, right? So what does he say? Chatzi kav in roiva at samas loy. Now these roivas at samas, what are we speaking about? What's in there? So hechi dami. If they're the size of a barley bean, typically mishum etzem kasoira. Now, what does that mean? Etzem kasoira is only tamatumis maga. This is we want to be metamatumis oil. So it doesn't make any sense what the Gemara is zustelling. So Tosfos says something very interesting. Look at Tosfos. Top Tosfos. Tzarachian. My kaparach. What are you asking? Chatzi kav versus roiva. Hal Indian oil arinon. We're speaking about a tumas oil. That's some kisoira. Loy metama oil. It won't be metama tumas oil. But oimeri, the samich amay demeinin lameima besamich. With samich, I'm going to say in a second. The basit did not bereisha chatzi kav demashma aval pachas loy. Amay itzrich lemisni besefer roivat samais. The einan nozim megaleich alav. In other words, the Mishnah said, guys, look. I'll read to you the lashon of the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said, "Al chatzi kav at somais." You would go ahead. Why would it be necessary then to say afterwards, what? Al roiva hakav. And afterwards says, Al elunaz megaleh. And why would it be necessary to go ahead and say for roiva at somais? Why in the next Mishnah it says roiva at somais? Why would it be necessary to go ahead and say that? In the next Mishnah, it says roivat samais. So if you said chatzi kav, why would you have to say what? Roivat samais. Look at Nun Daled, guys. Look at Nun Daled. Mishnah. Al sechachos v'aproyis v'beis we'll get to this soon. Ve'eretz amim v'agol v'adoifik v'vias nam v'oil v'roiva at samais. Right? Why would you have to tell me roiva at samais? If you know from the ratio over here, it says chatzi kav, meaning you need chatzi kav at somais. Why do you have to tell me roiva kav not? Why would you have to tell me that? So that's what it's asking. Since you learn chatzi kav, why would you have to say in the sefer roiva at somais? Deina naz megaleach alav. Umeshani b'samach the ayri lemedek the pachas michatzi kav loy megaleach al hilu. Pachas michatzi kav, you wouldn't go ahead and be megaleach on the oil. Aval al magoy v'amasoy megaleach. The main purpose to tell me chatzi kav is not to tell me that's metamatum oil. It's to tell me that roiva kav would be metamatum maga. That roiva kav would be metamatum maga. So now, for the Gemara, if your main chiddush is that roiva kav is metamatum maga, why do you need roiva kav? Even if you have an etzem kisoira, it's metamatum oil. Okay, outside. Let's get it. the chiddush of chatzi kav is not that it's matama b'oil. The chiddush of chatzi kav is that roiva kav is not matama b'oil, it's matama b'maga. That's the chiddush, the inference. If you tell me roiva kav is matama maga, why do you need me the quarter of a kav? If I have one bone that's the size of a soira, it's matama tumas maga. So why would you have to tell me a roiva, a quarter of a kav? Even one bone would do the job. Look at the Gemara now. Chatzi kav at samis in, roiva at samis loy. Hechidan and what's the chiddush? That it's matama tumas maga. Chatzi kav at samis is matama tumas oil. Roiva at samis is not matama tumas oil. It's only matama tumas maga. So hechidami. Ilay medismu at samis kasoira. If the roiva kav has etzem kasoira, typically mishum etzem kasoira, then the tumas maga is because of that bone, not because of the amount of the quarter. And that the Gemara says you have to say el the akmech akmuche. It must be that the bones are pulverized to the extent that that they're like kemach, they're like flour, that you don't have etzem kasoira. Good. Challenging Gemara. Challenging Gemara. But again, it's set up good. I think so. Now, the Mishnah had said, "Al Aver min ameis, val Aver min achai, sheyesh lehem basar karoi." In order for an Aver, the chiddush is again the chiddush is shidri regardless. You don't need basar. You don't need a kazayas basar. What you do need, guys, is an amount of basar. If it was attached to a live person, it would regenerate. That's what you need. That if the basar was attached to a bone that's attached to a live person, it would regenerate. That's what you need. Now, ein aleim basar karoi mai. What happens if it doesn't have basar karoi? What's the din? Meaning, zicha, it's not metama tumas oil, guys. Would it be metama tumas maga? In order to be metama tumas oil, you need the what? That it should have basar on it. And mainly we said if it has basar, it has sinus. Atzomis and sinus, right? It's an aver. What happens if it doesn't have basar? Can an aver without basar be metama? Well, we wouldn't even call it an aver. Can a bone without basar be metama tumas maga? My Rabbi Yochanan ain't another megalech. Now, is it metama tumas maga? For sure, it is, guys. If an etzem kisoir is metama tumas maga, certainly what a full bone is metama tumas maga. The shiler is, will it override his naziris? Remember, there's two parshias. There's the parsha of oil and of mitzaira of oilus of tamei mace, and then there's the parsha. Well, it's tamei mace. Is it the tamei mace that will be soiser and naziris? So that's what we want to know. So, guys, watch outside. You got a bone. It's got basar on it. You're in an oil. You're a nazir. You're out. Touch a bone. Touch a bone. Right? Touch a bone. Are you out? Etzem k'soir, are you out? Yeah, we said you are. What about an aver? An aver, would be mitama tumas masa to get me out of the parsha? Look at Taisus. Enoli basar kroi mai. Havadai dal ahilu le'yagaleach. Vadai, you're not going to override the naziris on oil. Kidid kani masnisa dafka kshesh le'im basar because kroi dafka one has meat. El b'magu masloi ub'shein shem etzem k'soira. Right, guys, you need two things. You need the maga, and you got to say the bone is so small, it's less than what? Than a soira. But it was an aver. It's such a... yeah. Look, we said yesterday, guys, for example, that in every finger and every toe, there's 6 avarim. That's what we said, right? 6 avarim. If that aver has a tiny bone, has a piece of meat on it, even if the meat is less than a kazayas for sure, it's going to be metama tumas oil, and therefore it'll override the naziris. If the bone itself is the size of etzem kesaira, it's going to be sized in naziris. What happens if the meat falls off the bone, but the bone was once upon a time considered an aver, and it's not the size of a etzem kesaira? Would it go ahead tumas maga override the naziris or not? That's the shaila. It's a very, very... One more time. You got a bone. It was once part of it's an aver. It had basar. The basar is gone. It's not the size of a sa'ira. Does it retain its averkite? I just made up that word. Does it retain its averkite to go ahead and be metama tumas maga to override the naziris? That's the shaila. So it's a machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan Amar ein anazir megaleach aleim. The nazir is not going to megaleach on that. In other words, he's good. Reish Lakish Amar hanazir megaleach aleim. The Nazir will be, it'll override his Naziris. Rabbi Yochanan Me'ena Nazir Megaleach Aleim, the Hadiktani Bereisha, Alevim min HaMeis, Valevim min HaChai, Sheyesh Aleihem, Basar, take away the Kazayas. In Avalein Aleihem, Loi. In other words, it's a Pashut Diak. Our Mishnah was describing that's going to override the Naziris. It said when the Aver has Basar. What's the Diak? If the Aver doesn't have Basar, and you have to eat, and it doesn't have an Etzim Kesaira, it won't override the Naziris. That's the Diak of Rabbi Yochanan. Reb Shimon ben Lakish Aimar Migaleach. You know why? Midaloi Ketani B'Seifa. The Mishnah on Daf Nadal, guys. Let's look at the Mishnah. Mishnah Daf Nadal. Avos Chachos, Vaprois, Ubeis HaPras, the Eretz HaAmim, Vahagoylil. We'll go through all these things. Vahadoifik, Revias Dam, Roivat Samais, the Kalim Hanagoyim B'Meis, Umeis Sipuroi, Ubimei Gomroi, Al Eiler Eina Nazir Megaleach. Good. The Nazir, this won't override the Naziris. Did it mention over there Aver without Basar? It did. Says Reish Lakish, since you didn't mention over there an Aver without Basar, it must be an Aver without Basar, would override the Naziris. So Rabbi Yochanan is Medayik from the Reisha, and Reish Lakish is Medayik from the Seifa. Rabbi Yochanan is Medayik from the Reisha, that what? It's Mashma Dafka when the Aver has Basar, and only then is it overriding the Naziris. If it doesn't have Basar, not. Reish Lakish is Medayik from the Seifa. Only these don't override the Naziris. And since you don't list an Aver without Basar, it must be an Aver without Basar, does override the Naziris. Says the Gemara, Reish Lakish Amar Megaleach Midaloi Ketani B'Seifa. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lecha Kol Heichadim Mashma Mechlala Loi Ketani B'Seifa. So Rabbi Yochanan comes up with a rule. Really, it should have listed it in the Seifa, but you don't have to, because we can infer it from the Reisha. Anything we can infer from the Reisha will not be listed in the Seifa. So what does the Reisha say? But Aver Sheyesh Lav Basar. We can infer if it doesn't have Basar, it doesn't override. No need to list it in the Seifa. Fred the Gemara, if that's the case, V'chatzi kavat somais demashma chatzi kavat somais in roivat somais loi v'ketani b'seifa roivat somais. 1 second, I can infer dafka a half and not a quarter. Yet we just did the Mishnah and listed a quarter. Says the Gemara Chasam ilav roivat somais. If you didn't list that, avamina afilu amagoy masoy loi. I would think you're not. It's not even metama tumas mago masa. Lachiyetzus lemisni roivat somais. The oil aleim hudei nas megaleach, right? That dafka nas is not megaleach, but it would be metama b'mago masa. But we won't be megaleach on them, but it would be metama. For chatzi loik dam, the shemamina chatzi loik dam in revias dam loy, and you the katani seifa. Again, we do learn an inference. The Reisha says only a half, and it says mashman not a quarter of dam of loik dam, and it says in the seifa. It says Gemara revias dam hasan lafbukim der Akiva. The reason we listed is to go ahead and exclude the din of Rabbi Akiva, right? It's to go ahead and exclude the din of Rabbi Akiva. That Rabbi Akiva said that he holds, the reason why we listed in the Sefer, guys, because we hold that a quarter of a dam, the nasa will not be megaleach. That's why we listed it, because Rabbi Akiva in fact holds a quarter of a dam, the nasa would be megaleach. So therefore we listed it al Fuke Rabbi Akiva. Okay, we're going to stop over here. I think it's enough for one day. And Bez Hashem, it's a Shabbos. Everyone should have a great Shabbos. Thank you for listening.